Yo, what is up guys? It is Bumfris, back with another episode of Pro Revenge. Today's episode is gonna be a banger, and I know you're gonna love this one. A quick thank you for all the love on my recent videos, and I just want to say if we can hit 3,500 likes on this video in the next 24 hours, tomorrow's episode of Entitled Parents will be 25 minutes long again. So, you better get to liking, then sit back, relax, and laugh at some Pro Revenge. The internet has evolved quite a lot over the years. Some people may remember Usenet groups. I know I do, and I used to have a lot of fun reading them. Kind of similar to today's Reddit in a way, no matter what the subject was, someone would have a Usenet news group for it. But unlike today's Reddit, it was strictly text. You could download images, but they would take forever to download and could often be across several different messages. Just one of the messages missing and you wouldn't get the image. Things then improved, like download speed slowly got faster, and then there was IRC that came about. IRC saw the same thing. There were chat rooms for anything and everything, and if there wasn't, you could clearly create it. If you were to try and watch a video over the internet back then, it could take you a couple of hours to download a music video. So you get the idea. This is super important for the context of the story. I was a writer on a couple of wrestling newsletters during the mid to late 90s. We only published newsletters online. You could have it emailed to you or go onto a website to read it. I think we hosted on GeoCities or Tripod. Both wrestling newsletters were independent of each other, and I used different nicknames on each. One was more a review and preview newsletter where we would post reviews of the most recent shows and events, talk about current feuds, and talk about what we may think will happen in the next big event. The other newsletter was a news and rumors newsletter with a few fun puzzles and competitions thrown in to keep things interesting. At the time, you had a few big name wrestling news and rumor websites and a handful of small ones. I was a writer on one of the small ones. Sometimes we would get our news and rumors from the big name websites, giving them credit where appropriate. Sometimes we would hear things from people in the business, as everyone had their sources of information. And sometimes we would just make an educated guess on possible scenarios based on current trends in the industry. It did get a bit cutthroat at times, with some newsletters claiming that they broke the news first when it had already been published in other newsletters first. And you would even have some newsletters devote all of their time trying to rubbish the other newsletters for publishing false and misleading information. It was rumors, and we did not always get it right. Through a couple of readers of my first wrestling newsletter, I learned of a huge surprise in the works for one organization, which could potentially lead to something happening at a big event coming up. I won't mention the surprise, but it involved a person from another sport. No other wrestling newsletter had reported it, so I included it as a rumor in the second wrestling newsletter. I was instantly rubbished by one of the major wrestling newsletters at the time for publishing a clearly nonsense rumor that would never happen, only for that very same newsletter to publish the exact same rumor 2 or 3 days later and claim to be the first ones to publish it. This sort of stuff happened all the time, and it did not bother me at all. Anyway, I happen to have a few wrestlers who actually read my first newsletter. There were no big names as such, but a couple of lesser known wrestlers in the big organizations. I knew who they were, but refused to reveal their identities back then, and refused to reveal them now. One of them let me know of an unknown fact from a major match a couple of years earlier. It was to do with an injury that happened during a part of a match. This fact had never been published anywhere else at the time. I mentioned that I wrote for another wrestling newsletter that dealt with news and rumors and asked if I could repeat the information. The wrestler said sure, but not to credit him. So I go ahead and publish the rumor. Straight away, I had another one of the smaller wrestling newsletters say that it was nonsense. They said that it was impossible for the match to have continued had the injury happened. They then started a smear campaign on the second newsletter. I was getting spam emails constantly, virus attempts originating from the competition, and the competition even went so far as to claim that they had a full story of my wife of 10 years working as a hooker. Don't ask, they were just trying to find anything to smear me with. There was some more sinister and disgusting stuff, but I won't write it here. Why it got so personal, I do not know. But the funny thing was that at the time, I was a 22-year-old single university student, and if I had a wife of 10 years who was working as a hooker, I would have had to marry her when I was 12. But this smear campaign was working, and our readership dropped by nearly 50%. It was time to get some revenge, although I had no idea just how far the revenge would end up reaching. Firstly, I approached one of the bigger wrestling newsletters. They would often run ads at the bottom or rear of their newsletters for affiliated newsletters. I organized a new affiliation with them, removing an affiliation that they had with the competition. Just small potatoes. I started promoting the second newsletter heavily on Usenet in some of the wrestling groups, which ultimately led to an increase in our email subscription base, much greater than it was before his smear campaign. This negated any effect that his smear campaign had, but I was hungry for more. I wanted to shove it where the sun don't shine. So I contacted those wrestlers who read my first newsletter. I explained the situation to them and they were happy to help out. It took a couple of weeks, but eventually I was able to post a link to a 15-second video hosted on a GeoCities website, as well as on my Wrestling Usenet group, where the wrestler at the center of the injury rumor not only confirmed it, but gave a shout out to my second newsletter. While it validated me and my information, it still didn't shut the other guy up. But finally, a break. While the guy used an alias for his newsletter, he did actually mention his name a couple of times and where in the US he attended university. Using this information, I was able to get a friend of mine in the US to do some searching for me, someone who attended that very same university, and discovered that the guy had actually completed a journalism degree several years earlier. Further research indicated that he was now working as a reporter for a regional newspaper in the US. His wrestling newsletter must just be a hobby, so I decided to send all of the information that I had, being his smear campaign, etc., to the newspaper office. I don't know what, if anything, it would do, but it was worth a shot. About a month later, I got an email back from the newspaper thanking me for the information. They discovered that he was using the newspaper's system to run the wrestling newsletter, which was against their policy, so they fired him. And because the newspaper was part of a chain of regional newspapers across the US, he was going to struggle to find another journalism job. The newsletter got shut down as well, because without the newspaper systems to run it, the guy had no way of continuing with the newsletter. As a side note, I ended up finishing with the newsletters not long after anyway. The first newsletter, as I was just a writer for it, I finished up with it when the owner of the newsletter decided to close it down. He just didn't have the time to devote to it due to work commitments. The second one, I started off as just a writer/contributor, then took over their competitions, then eventually took over the whole newsletter as the original owner didn't want to do it anymore. But in the end, I was just finishing up at university and I had to move on with my career, so I closed it down. I guess the moral of a story like this is, if you don't want to have your own reputation tarnished and potentially have your own career ruined, don't go out of your way on the internet or even in general to make people look bad, because at some point it's going to come back and bite you in the butt. You know, over something like this, I would hate to think that it's completely ruined this guy's chances in the journalism field, but at the same time, and even more so if it was in today's culture, the actions that this person took could have literally ruined OP's life, because with the internet so readily accessible these days, this kind of information can spread like wildfire. At the end of the day, it just makes me wonder, why can't people be nice to each other? After graduating college, my girlfriend and I moved to a new state where she was accepted into an engineering program. We found a lovely garden apartment style complex that advertised 100 megabit a second internet speeds included in the price, among a few other amenities. When we first met the property manager, he seemed strict but well mannered. Nothing out of the ordinary until we signed the lease. Now to the first problem. Suddenly, walking into his office was not allowed without an appointment. I had come by to ask a question, saw him browsing social media, and figured he was as available as he made himself to us when we first came by, unannounced, to view a model apartment. But nope. He refused to answer my questions and asked me to make an appointment via email. The second problem was that the terms of our lease included an attachment that needed to be completed within 48 hours of accepting the keys, and it detailed all of the discrepancies within the unit. We submitted the attachment via email around the 40th hour. The property manager responded that the terms recently changed from 48 to 24 hours, and since we had passed 24 hours, we would be held liable for all found damages. When citing our copy of the lease, which explicitly stated 48 hours, he informed us that we signed an outdated copy and would need to make an appointment to come by the office and sign a new lease. And the third problem was that the internet speed was not 100 megabits a second as advertised. It was less than 15 megabits a second off peak and about 5 megabits a second on peak. We again contacted the property manager to complain, but we were referred to make an appointment. And the fourth and final problem was that we made an appointment to address the previous three problems, and during this meeting and after I'd finished voicing our issues, the property manager leans forward and says, "There are other communities in this neighborhood that may be more accepting of people like you and your girlfriend. You're welcome to break the lease and leave." Yeah, people like you and your girlfriend. I thought that he was referencing our no-nonsense response to his nonsense. Daily communications, scheduling multiple meetings to address the issues, etc. But my girlfriend believed that he was speaking towards the color of our skin. Her being a black woman and myself a white man. My girlfriend jokingly told me to check my privilege before getting serious and explaining to me that we were experiencing discrimination at the very least. So the solution. I did some research and discovered that the property manager worked for a larger organization that owns several complexes throughout the country. I found their director of human resources on LinkedIn and made a connection. I then emailed her copies of all email correspondence, screenshots of the lease, pictures of the internet speed flags advertised on the road, and more screenshots of online speed tests. We further noted his comment and the implications behind it. The human resource director replied within a few hours and promised us that she would look into the issue. About 2 days later, the property manager called us up and asked us to come by his office at our convenience. We showed up near the end of the day and sat down across from him. He then proceeded to ask us if we'd be willing to write a letter stating that we accepted his apology despite not yet offering said apology, and in return he would credit us a month's rent, accept our damage attachment, and promise to have the ISP on site within a week to assess the internet issues. We declined, he got personal with us and revealed that his job may be at stake and asked us to reconsider. My girlfriend just leaned forward and said, "There are other communities in this neighborhood that may be more accepting of people like you, and you are welcome to leave." The property manager was replaced in a week with a super sweet older woman who not only gave us all of the things the original property manager had promised, being the 1 month credit, accepting the damages attachment, and then further scheduling maintenance to fix said damages, having the ISP assess and upgrade the internet to the promised speeds, but she also made it clear that her office was always open for anything we may need. I looked up the old property manager a few months later on LinkedIn and he's still unemployed. See, the thing is with this kind of behavior, it's so typical with like your property managers and your real estate agents and that, where what they do is they'll act like the nicest person in the world, and then as soon as you've actually committed to something, they just do a complete shift and become the biggest a-hole of all time. Don't get me wrong, there's some amazing property managers and some amazing real estate agents out there. Personally, I haven't had too many issues. Anytime I've ever had a problem with my own property, my property manager is onto it in a flash. But it's people like this who give them an awful reputation, and quite frankly, I don't think they're in the correct job. I reckon the OP has not only done every single person that's ever been managed by this person a favor, but also the property manager himself, because quite frankly, he's better off finding a job that he's more suited to. My wife and I moved to our current city back in 2013. The standards for my wife's job here are different to the standards back home. She has an associate's degree and most employers wanted a bachelor's degree. However, nothing could stop her and she kept putting in applications. One day, one of the employers that she sent applications to gave her a call back. However, it was not to tell her that she had gotten the job. Instead, it was the manager telling her how unprofessional it was of her to put in for positions that were obviously above her. In fact, "I'm going to delete your email from our system. Please don't apply anymore as it's just a waste of our time. I'll send you a letter since you can't seem to follow directions in my emails." My wife, after she got over her initial shock, asked the manager for her name. She says, "I don't see why it matters, but Ivanka Tulip." My wife said thank you and continued her job hunt. Sure enough, she got a letter in the mail asking her not to apply anymore, citing inability to follow clear directions. My wife held on to this letter. I told her to throw it away, but she insisted on keeping it. Eventually, my wife landed a job at one of the biggest employers in the city. Not only that, but this employer was the main supplier of business to the employer that was so rude to my wife. Well, my wife is an extremely precious and hardworking person, and eventually got her bachelor's and then became the manager over her crew. One of the manager's responsibilities was to decide who to send business to. My wife told her boss about the letter and what happened, and used that as justification that if this is how a business treats potential hires, then they really shouldn't be trusted with their business. Her boss honestly probably didn't care very much and just let my wife do what she does. Wouldn't you know it, the rude employer's business went way down. In fact, my wife would only give them business if they were the last ones who could be called. This led to the most awesome meeting that my wife had this year. You see, to improve relations, the crappy employer set up a meeting with my wife and my wife's boss, and the crappy business's top management. They needed this meeting to show just how much value they could add. The day of the meeting comes and everyone introduces themselves. Finally, Mrs. Tulip says she is the manager and how nice it was to meet everyone. That's when my wife said, "Excuse me, I just want to be certain, are you Mrs. Ivanka Tulip?" Ivanka says, "Yes, that's me." And my wife says, "Oh, excellent. I'm so happy to finally meet you in person." Thinking that she had it in with my wife, Mrs. Tulip was over the moon. My wife let them carry on and tell her about how much value they could add to the business and how they could really help out my wife's employer. This is when my wife says, "Well, thank you, but unfortunately I feel that we really can't give business to an employer who who we feel has some ethical issues that need to be addressed. And the big boss from the bad employer says, "Excuse me, but we were not made aware of any ethical issues. What are you talking about?" That's when my wife brought out the letter that was signed by Mrs. Tulip. My wife then tells them that if they would treat potential hires this way, then it was an ethics issue for my wife, and it would be very hard for my wife to give them business. Since she had concerns about the welfare of the business, she couldn't approve any more goes to bad businesses than absolutely necessary. Mrs. Tulip turned white, and you could hear a pin drop on the other side of the table. My wife thanked them for their time, apologized, and went back to her work. We don't know if anything ever happened to Miss Tulip, but that business has since downsized and has gotten a reputation for being a poor choice to send business to throughout my wife's organization. I mean, I've heard of some people holding grudges, but I've never heard of someone hold onto a grudge for this long and take out revenge on said person in such a serious way. I mean, as an employer, it's so easy just to support your applicants and give them genuine feedback about where they can improve. It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get the job, but it also doesn't mean that there's not an opportunity for them down the track. You just gotta say, work on this, this, and this, and encourage them to apply later on. Being rude like this to people achieves nothing, and it just goes to show that the way you treat people will always come back around. Alright everyone, that is that for today's episode of Pro Revenge. I just want to start off by saying thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. A quick shout out to everyone who's been coming and watching my videos every single day in the last week or two. I cannot tell you how much it means to me, and I'm loving interacting with you guys every day. If you did enjoy today's video, don't forget to hit the thumbs up button down below, and a reminder that 3,500 likes on today's video means a long episode of Entitled Parents tomorrow. If you are new, hitting that subscribe button helps the channel out massively, and once you've done those things, on your screen right now, what you're going to see are two of my amazing videos, one of which I would highly suggest you click on to go down a rabbit hole of entitled parents. But that is going to wrap things up for today's episode of Pro Revenge. I just want to say again, thank you so much for watching. I hope you're all having a fantastic day, and I'll see you guys tomorrow for another episode of Entitled Parents. Bye.